right, let's come on in and get started. Bring your coffee if you want. Bring your grapes. Don't choke on them. Come on in. We'll go ahead and see. I want to sing before we turn it back over, and we're going to have some more teaching. Number 6, I sing the mighty power of God. Number 6 in your songbook there. Number 6 in your songbook, I sing the mighty power of God. Join with me now. I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing sins abroad and filled the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The mountains full his command, and all the stars obey. I sing the goodness of the Lord that filled the earth with food. He formed the creatures with his word and then pronounced them good. Lord, how thy wonders are displayed where I turn my eye. If I survey the tread or gaze upon the sky, and on the last verse, there's not a plant or flower below, but makes thy glories known. And clouds arise and tempests blow by order from thy throne, while all that borrows life from thee is ever in thy care. And everywhere that man can be, thou, God, art present there. All right, I enjoyed that first section. Did you? Amen. All right, we had 2 say amen. Everybody enjoyed that, I know. And so let's just open up our hearts and minds for what the Lord has for us in this next few minutes. Come on, Brother Boyd.
I'm going to stay right down here, Pastor.
All right.
Steps is not my friend. December 21st, I got a old left knee replacement. I try to avoid going up and down steps. Can y'all hear me? Yes. Shame on you if you don't. Let me give you this, and then you're going to be blessed tonight. My brother-in-law, tremendous singer, he's going to bless you in a few minutes. Dr. Jacob. Let me make this very clear to us. Jesus tells us in Matthew 7, you're either building on the rock or you're building on the sand. We got a lot of Christians building on the sand. Jesus said the wind and the waves will descend, and that house on the sand will be what portion. But if you build on the rock, you're still going to have the elements, but you'll be able to stand. Folks, creation is the rock of our salvation. You got a lot of pastors don't have the courage of Pastor Whitney to say, we know we need to have information about the foundation. Psalms 11:3 says, if the foundation is destroyed, what can the righteous do? Our foundation is being destroyed. We're not building on the rock, so we don't have anything. Creation is not important. I believe Ken Ham wrote a book in 2009, already gone. You know why people have left the faith, left Christianity, left? Because they never got answers. Our job is to give you answers. You're coming to learn the truth, so what? Let me give you this, and then we'll have Elder Cranman come and bless us. Further research said 1,600 pastors in Sweden church gonna look at like 10 years from now? What is this church here gonna look like 10 years from now? Last starting statistic is we've got 92% of our Christian boys and girls go to secular universities like Notre Dame, Michigan, Michigan State, and don't come back to the church. I pray for you young people here that you don't get sidetracked. Be here in the word of God. The truth. Why did Jesus say often in his teachings, in the beginning, in the beginning, in the beginning? Why is there an attack on Genesis? Because that's in the beginning. That's why they attack Genesis all the time. But Jesus made clear the importance of creation. Three things in the book of Genesis I want to note. Actually, you're doing a lot of talking. That's what I do. I don't come to give you no lecture. That's Jay's job. I do a lot of talking. I want to give you information that the Lord's given you. Three important things happen in Genesis. Number one, creation. Y'all still with me? Yeah. I'm going to have a terrible time preaching tomorrow.
Hang out, Pastor Bill.
I'll join you all. The creation, number one. Number two importance in Genesis chapter 3, the fall. You know the third important thing in Genesis? Genesis 3:15, the promise of the Messiah. If you get rid of the book of Genesis, you lose the creation story. I'm sorry, correct me. I used to say, you know the story. Holy Spirit convicted the Bible. That's why people don't read the Bible, because they read too much stories. Lord convicted me, don't say stories. The biblical account. Wow, it's true. So you got the creation, you got the fall, you got the promise of the Messiah. It's a biblical truth. If you get rid of Genesis, you lose all of that truth. That's why it's our job to give you the message. 4 life questions in the L panel. There's 4 life questions. Every soul. And you'd be surprised how many young people commit suicide. That's one of the leading causes of our young people. Because they're hopeless. You don't know if they're a chicken, a cow, or a cat, and so when you get depressed and kill themselves. There's 4 life questions. I want to leave it all with you. There's 4 life questions. You ready? Who am I? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? And where am I going? There are 5 paths. Another path. And then Dr. Jim. Dr. Jim. Then Q&A. I'm going to go back and take my seat. Thank y'all for listening. Keep listening.
You want to use the microphone?
I'm just going to find Kate.
Can you hear me back there? Okay, I don't need to use the mic. But I wish I had a podium I could take it on. No.
Right there. Right there.
Okay. And you know this song. I do like contemporary music, but there's something about the hymn. This song is special to me, and I hope it's special to you. I remember one time I was in the hospital, 2013. I went through the windshield because I passed out. And when I didn't go home to my house, I went and stayed at his house. He's married to my sister, so they decided to come and stay for a while. It just so happened I was in a room with a piano, and there was an old hymnal at the piano, and I was just thumbing through it, page after page after page. And read the hymns that were in that book. Then sings my soul, my Savior God to thee. And I'm saying it, but she's singing it. How great thou art. Jay, can you see me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you. That's enough.
I can't see you.
I can hear you. That's good enough.
Oh Lord, my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all
Alrighty, so I promised it. Now I'm going to deliver. How dinosaurs relate to the Bible, how they fit into the Bible, and what science tells us about dinosaurs. So, a lot of people say, well, you can't find the word dinosaur in the Bible. Well, that's true because the word dinosaur was invented long after the translations were done. So you don't expect it there. The word dinosaur was invented by this handsome gentleman. I actually included this in this is a public domain image, so it's in one of my biology books. And I have people review my books, PhDs review my books before they're published to make sure I don't make any stupid mistakes. And one of the reviewers said, this guy actually paid somebody to paint that. Anyway, it was invented by Richard Owen in 1842. It combines two Greek words, dinos, which means fearfully great, and sauros, which means lizard. So you don't expect it to be in any of the English translations because the word's a fairly new word. However, you do see great descriptions of dinosaurs. And the first one, when I was an atheist and realized that science told me there had to be a creator, I read a bunch of books about that claim to know about God. So I read the Bhagavad Gita, which is Hindu scripture, and I read the Quran. I read the Taoist works and so forth. And I read the Old and New Testament. And I remember when I read this back before I believed the Bible, just reading the Bible, I was like, wow, they knew about dinosaurs. Because when you read Job 40:15-23, behold now behemoth, and this is, I'll talk about that in a minute, but behold now behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox, lo, his strength is in his loins, his force is in the navel, his belly, he moveth his tail like a cedar, the sinews of his stones are wrapped together, his bones are as strong pieces of brass, his bones are like bars of iron. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteth not, he trusteth that he can draw up Jordan in his mouth. So God is talking to Job, as if Job should have seen this. And he said, Job, I made him with thee. He's an herbivore. He eateth grass as an ox. He's big. He's got a huge tail. He swings his tail like a cedar. And he's big enough to drink up an entire river. Now, there's only one creature that I think of that fits that description. Like I said, before I even believed the Bible, I read that and said, that's a patasaurus. That's a sauropod dinosaur. And it's really the only animal that fits that description. Now, if you read some theologians, they'll say behemoth is actually a hippopotamus. And that doesn't make sense because absolutely hippopotami do not have tails that swing like cedars. They have tails that swing like brushes, right? Behemoth is supposed to be unimaginably big enough to drink up a whole river. Hippos are fat, but they aren't really that big. There are many animals that are much bigger than hippos, right? Elephants are bigger than hippos, right? Also, the Hebrew word used in this passage, this is the English version of that Hebrew word. It actually means great beast, and it's used plenty of times in the Bible. And usually it's translated based on its context. So sometimes it's describing an ox. Sometimes it's describing another known beast. And because of the context, the translators were able to say, okay, that word behemoth in this case is referring to an ox. However, in this case, they had no way of knowing because back in the 1600s, they didn't know about dinosaurs. So in the end, when the translators looked at that, they couldn't figure out what behemoth meant. So they simply changed it to English. And so the word behemoth became a new word in English because it was a Hebrew word that they couldn't translate into any known animal. And this is because dinosaurs weren't known about during the 1600s. At that time, people found rocks that looked like bones, but they actually just thought they were interestingly shaped rocks. They had no idea that they were actually fossils. It wasn't until the 1680s when Robert Hooke did some very detailed microscopic analysis of these rocks that he decided they had to be the remains of once living organisms. So they just had no idea about dinosaurs, so they didn't know what behemoth could have been. Now that we know about dinosaurs, the description is absolutely flawless. It's a sauropod dinosaur. And you find something similar in Job 41. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord that thou lettest down? So he lives in water, right? Canst thou bore his jaw through with a thorn? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed iron, or his head with fish spears? None is so fierce that dare stir him up. His scales are his pride, so he's a reptile. In his neck remaineth strength, so he's got a big neck. When he raiseth himself up, so he can raise himself up out of the water, the mighty are afraid. He esteemeth iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Once again, this is a great description of Plesiosaurus. You know, he raises himself up and his neck remaineth strength. Now, once again, some theologians will tell you that's a crocodile. But once then, the description of the neck doesn't work at all. I don't know any crocodiles that raise themselves up. They stay on all fours. This Hebrew word, Leviathan, actually means serpent, and it's used 4 other times in Scripture, and it's never translated into a known animal. So in this case, we never know what Leviathan means. It's just always translated as Leviathan. So anyway, once we know what a plesiosaurus looks like, this description makes perfect sense. But the key is, God is talking to Job as if Job should have seen both of these things, right? So that indicates that dinosaurs and humans actually lived at the same time. They may not have shared necessarily the same space, but they lived at the same time. Is there any evidence for this? And the surprising answer is there's a lot of evidence for it. People just don't like to talk about it. And some of the most interesting evidence is drawings that were made long before we knew about fossils and dinosaurs and so forth that are accurate depictions of dinosaurs. It's hard to see, and I'm going to show you a drawing of it in a minute, but this is a piece of rock art that you can find in the United States. It's in the Natural Bridges National Monument. I don't know if you can see it here, but if I show you it's hard to get to because first of all, it's behind glass, so it's hard to take a good picture of it. Not glass, but plastic. It's all been, protected. And so it's hard to take a good picture of it, but somebody who was actually there and took that picture also made a drawing. And that's what that's what you see if you use your eyes rather than a camera. And you know what that is, right? That's a behemoth. That's a sauropod dinosaur. And what's crazy is notice how his feet disappear in water, right? This is exactly what paleontologists say these sauropod dinosaurs did. They walked around in shallow water. And what did they do? They ate plants. He's eating a tree. Now, if I was dreaming up some dinosaur, I doubt that I'd make him an herbivore, right? If I was dreaming up some terrible lizard. But in fact, that's what it is. It got the long tail like the cedar. And once again, if this were the only example, you might think, oh, it's just kind of weird. But it's all over the place. So this is in a Cambodian temple. The temple was made in the late 12th or early 13th century. I have a colleague who actually went to that temple. He made a three-dimensional laser drawing so that he could then cast it into rock. So this is just a cast of what the laser saw. Now you look at that. What is it? Yeah, it's Stegosaurus. Obviously, Stegosaurus. Now, once again, in the 12th and 13th century, we didn't have paleontologists. We didn't even know that fossils represented the remains of once living organisms. But yeah, I've got this perfect a model of Stegosaurus. So clearly, these guys had to be working based on descriptions of somebody who had seen these things. And if you go across the pond, you go to Europe. I don't know if you know this. I went to Europe, and I was really surprised by this. In most of the big churches in Europe, there are people buried in the church, right? And so, this is the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell. He was the Bishop of Carlisle, died in 1495. His tomb is just under the floor of the church. And so the marker is this, and people, of course, walk on it all the time because it's on the floor, right? So it's a little worn, but, this is supposed to be him, and this is his cathedral and so forth. Well, there's this border that goes all the way around. And if you look at it closely, it has etchings of all these animals. right? And so, for example, this is one of the etchings. And once again, it's been walked on, so it's been smoothed out quite a bit over the years. But you can clearly see that's a bat, right? And almost every one of the etchings, except the one I'm going to show you, is of an animal we've seen, except for this one. That's there too. Once again, two great etchings of two sauropod dinosaurs. And that right along with a bat and all these other animals that people had seen. Now, it's hard to imagine that all of these people making these drawings just happened to be drawing monsters and got it right? They must have been working off descriptions. So in the end, these kind of artistic drawings made by people who didn't know about paleontology indicate that at least somebody had seen dinosaurs and at least either passed down their descriptions or drawings or something so that other artists could make them later. Right? And this is in North America and South America, in Europe, you can find accurate depictions of dinosaurs. And there are some that are kind of hard to verify. So there are some stones called Ica stones that supposedly have dinosaur drawings on it. Those are hard to authenticate, but we know when this drawing was made. It was made in 1495. We know when the Cambodian temple was built. It was built sometime between the 12th and 13th century. We know that this was made by people who didn't know anything about dinosaurs, but made perfect drawings of them, right? Also, we now know that there's soft tissue in dinosaur fossils. We never thought, or scientists never thought to look for soft tissue in dinosaur fossils because dinosaur fossils are supposed to be millions of years old. Soft tissue decays pretty rapidly. So no one ever thought to look inside to see, typically, you don't want to break dinosaur bones because they're very, very, very valuable and you want to keep them intact. However, Dr. Mary Schweitzer and her colleagues in 2005, when they were trying to excavate the femur of a Tyrannosaurus rex, so the femur is the bone that goes from the hip to the knee, usually the longest bone in a vertebrate. When they were trying to excavate it, they accidentally broke it. And inside they found this. And she says in her paper, you grab this with forceps, you grab that with forceps, and you pull, that stretches. And when you release, it bounces back. So this is not only soft tissue, but that probably tendon is elastic still, right? It's supposed to be 65 million years old. We know that soft tissue usually decays in about 50 weeks. What we know pretty well is the molecules that make these guys up, the proteins, they have a theoretical lifetime of about 30,000 years. So after 30,000 years, even under great condition, even the molecules that make this stuff up ought to have just decayed away. And yet it's still there, it's still soft. And in fact, we've found many, many others since then. So in 2009, Schweitzer and her colleagues found a hadrosaur fossil. This guy's supposed to be 80 million years old. He had soft tissue in his bone. This one's interesting. It was 2009. Maria McNamara and her colleagues found a salamander fossil. It's supposed to be 18 million years old, but what was cool about this soft tissue is it wasn't inside the bone. It was muscle tissue laying on top of the bone. So you have this fossilized bone with soft muscle tissue on top of it. Right? And that butt's supposed to be 18 million years old, right? 2010, Johan Lindgren and his colleagues found soft tissue in the eye socket of a mosasaur fossil. It's supposed to be 80 million years old. And when they looked at it under the microscope, they found the cellular features you expect of eye tissue, right? And once again, that's supposed to be 80 million years old. One Christian researcher looked for soft cells in a triceratops, and he published a paper showing very, very detailed microscopic images that indicated the cells themselves were still soft. So this is his paper that was in the peer-reviewed publication. So these three structures here are cells. And anybody who knows a little bit about histology knows that there's only one type of cell this can be, bone cell. Bone cells, osteocytes, are oblong, and they have these little extensions called filopodial extensions. That allows one bone cell to talk to another so that they can communicate and change their behavior based on the needs of the organism. And here's what he says in his peer-reviewed paper. Filopodial extensions were delicate and showed no evidence of permineralization or crystallization artifact, and therefore were interpreted to be soft. So they're dead, but they're soft cells. And these cells are supposed to be 65 million years old and still soft. Now, of course, the university fired him. And interestingly enough, I know this guy. His name's Mark Armitage. I've talked to him several times. And he doesn't think it was the paper that got him fired. What got him fired was when the paper came out, students learned that they could come to his lab and see dinosaur cells. So there was just this constant stream of students, 2 or 3 every day, who wanted to see the dinosaur cells. And of course, talking to students about dinosaur cells that are still soft but supposed to be 65 million years old confuses students. So in the end, that's when he was fired. According to the lawsuit that he filed, one of the person who actually ended up firing him came into his office and yelled, quote, "We are not going to tolerate your religion in this department," end quote. That ended up costing the university a lot of money. So with that money, he's still done more research. He's now isolated these cells out of the bone. So this is a soft, and he has, I'll show you where to go in a minute, but if you go on the internet, he has video of him using microscopic tweezers to hold one of those and just flop it. And you'll see the whole cell just flop back and forth because it's still soft. That's a Triceratops cell floating in liquid. You know what that is? That's the nucleus. You know what's in the nucleus? DNA. Now, DNA is probably strongly degraded, so I don't think you're going to get Jurassic Park out of this. But if you got enough of these cells, you could at least sequence the DNA. And you could then at least know what Triceratops DNA is. And it's because of this young Earth creationist researcher who's isolating these soft cells from dinosaur bones that are supposed to be millions of years old. He's found blood vessels, and what's in those blood vessels, these red spots? Those are coagulated red blood cells, right? They're dead, but they're still soft, right? He also found remnants of nerves. This is the nerve of a recently killed chicken. This is the nerve he found in his, this was a Tyrannosaurus fossil. So it's clearly nerve cells, or not nerve cells, nerves themselves. And they're supposed to be millions of years old. So recently killed chicken, dinosaur fossil doesn't look a lot different. Looks a little bit more degraded, but not 65 million years worth of degraded. He actually found this. This is really interesting. If you've ever potty trained a kid, you know that it takes time. And the reason is the nerves are still maturing. And so in order to control sphincters and everything, you have to have this right nerve function. The nerve function is complete when it's wrapped with this fatty sheath called a myelin sheath. This is a myelin sheath from a dinosaur that's unwrapped from the nerve. So normally there's a nerve in there, but this is just a completely unwrapped myelin sheath. And it's supposed to be 65 million years old. If you're interested in looking at some of this, his website's easy to remember. It's the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute, Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute, dstri.org. He's got videos, and he's published in the peer-reviewed literature all of these soft dinosaur cells. And of course, no one can explain how they can survive for millions of years, but they have to survive for millions of years, at least according to most people. Also, we were talking about carbon-14 a little while ago. Remember, carbon-14 has a maximum half-life, or a maximum age of about 100,000 years. Usually, it's used to date things that are supposed to be 60,000 years or older. Young Earth creationists for years have asked evolutionists to carbon date dinosaur bones because they knew that they weren't more than 60,000 years. So there should be some carbon-14 in these dinosaur bones. But evolutionists said, why would you bother? We know these bones are 65 million years old. All the carbon-14 is going to be gone away, so there's no reason to look at it. Well, finally, Young Earth creationists got enough research grants to actually find fossils and do what a lot of people don't like to do. They cut right into them because you don't want to carbon date the stuff on the edge. That's all contaminated. You go into the fossils. You have to hacksaw them apart and take samples from the middle of the fossil, send them off to a radioactive dating facility, and ask the radioactive dating facility to do a carbon-14 date on them. Now, if they're older than 60,000 years old, what the carbon-14 dating facility should tell you is, I can't date this because I can't find any carbon-14. So usually the way they report it is this thing is older than 60,000 years old. And that's all we can say because there's no carbon-14 in it. So creationists have sent dinosaur bones out to these carbon-14 labs, and guess what? Every one that has been tested has carbon-14 in it, right? So this the first one, the Acrocanthosaurus, supposed to be 100 million years old. The carbon-14 date is somewhere between 23,000 and 30,000 years old. Now, I don't think that's that old. It's certainly not 100 million years old. But the point is, if this date is accurate and that date is accurate, they should equal each other. Now, either one of them is wrong, or most likely both of them are wrong. But the idea is this date shouldn't even exist if it's anywhere close to even 1 million years old, much less 100 million years old. Triceratops fossil, that's actually the one you were seeing sampled in the previous slide. That supposed to be 65 million years old, came back as a carbon-14 date of somewhere between 24,000 and 39,000. Now, if this were anything other than a dinosaur bone, if this were like an emu bone or something like that, they'd accept that carbon-14 date. They'd say, okay, yeah, that's how old that is. But because it's a dinosaur bone, we don't accept that date. And in fact, that's how radioactive dating is done. If the date doesn't conform to your expectations, you just don't accept it. And so you look only at the dates that conform to your expectations. That's how it's done. So 8 dinosaur fossils from Texas, Alaska, Colorado, Montana, China, and Europe all had so much carbon-14 in them that they could be dated. Not a single one tested as expected by evolutionists. So once again, this indicates that these bones aren't millions of years old. And it's much more consistent with the idea that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. So I think that we've got artwork that accurately accurately portrays dinosaurs long before anybody knew about dinosaurs. We've got soft tissue in dinosaurs bones. We've got carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. All of that stuff is impossible if dinosaurs died out millions of years ago. This is much more consistent with the idea that dinosaurs and humans lived together. All right, I think that's it. Yep. Okay. Hold it. Oh, he's got to get up.
This is a tag team affair. I gotta get on the scene.
So anyway, the next time you hear that dinosaurs and humans didn't live at the same time, first of all, the reasoning that is used for that is geological column reasoning, which I showed in the first talk, doesn't work. And secondly, it's not consistent with any of this.
And Genesis chapter 1, 24 to 26, land animals, man. Dinosaurs, man. Hung out together. Don't believe Jurassic Park. And God said millions of years, yeah. All right, Q&A time. We're going to get, this is the last segment for tonight. Tomorrow morning we'll continue session number 3 at 9:30 a.m.
And it'll be completely different. It's going to be, this one is going to be the science you find in the Bible. So enormous amount of science in the Bible.
Evidence. Notice our title, Creation Evidence. We prove our thing. They're still talking about missing links. I better leave that alone. I'll be done said what I need to say. All right, Q&A time. Who's got a question?
Got one way back there.
Please.
My name is Katie.
Hi, Katie.
This is kind of, you said before that you were an atheist.
Yeah.
And then you were reading the Bible to understand why people were saying this as opposed to evolution. How did you come to understand God's word to be true?
So part of it was that when I read the Quran, I could have written a better book than that. And and so that was kind of, I put that away very quickly as, it's a piece of literature from history, but it doesn't mean anything useful. When I read the Taoist works, I found a lot of very good, interesting philosophy in there, but nothing very practical. In the Hindu, the Bhagavad Gita, I found some really good practical advice about how to live a good life and things like that, and some good philosophy. But when I read especially the Old Testament, I found good philosophy, good morals, and science that just wasn't known back then. And that kind of made me take notice. Now, that didn't convince me of the reality of Christianity, but that made me take notice. So I started doing a little more detailed looking at the Old Testament, and I started finding these prophecies that we know were written down before the events took place, because we can say in history when the Old Testament was completed and when it was translated into Greek. So we know when that happened, so it was all done by then. And yet, it predicted the fall of a city, like it predicted the fall of Tyre. During that prophecy, it's twice it says, I will make you a bare rock, you will be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea. If you go there now, it is flat, and it's where fishermen go to spread out their nets and repair them. You know, now this was written long before all these events took place, and the prophecies about Christ are astounding, you know, to someone who's not a Christian. You know, Zechariah predicts how much Christ would be portrayed for, what would happen to that money, and what it would be used to purchase. And we know for a fact it was written a year, at least 250 years before those events took place. That's what really convinced me, because you can't explain that. You know, everybody's crazy about Nostradamus, who can make these vague predictions and, you know, 10% of them come true if you interpret them properly. Here I've got the Bible making these detailed predictions. I mean, it actually says, when it's talking, when it's giving a foreshadowing of the cross, it says, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Garments and clothing mean different things in Hebrew. And if you look at the scripture, what happened? His outer garments were divided, but his tunic, which is clothing, couldn't be divided, so it was gambled for. I mean, that's really detailed. We have two external, non-Christian, non-Jewish sources that confirm that on the day Christ was crucified, that part of the earth went dark. And so we have two historians that confirm that happened, and that was prophesied in Amos. It actually says when it will happen. The earth, I will make the earth dark at noon, and that's exactly when Thallus and Pelagian, two non-Christian, non-Jewish historians, say that area went dark. So it was that stuff that really, I could explain around a lot of things, because that's what people like to do. To hold on to our beliefs, we explain around things. I couldn't explain around those prophecies. Too detailed. Yes, ma'am.
And my name is Anita. I have a question. Is
Anita.
there any elementary or high school system in America where they do teach creation?
Well, there are certain private schools that do, but you have to be careful. Just because it's a Christian private school doesn't mean they're going to teach creation, because a lot of them have capitulated to the culture on lots of different things. But there are Christian elementary and high schools that do teach young earth creationism. I tend to write for the homeschooling audience, where you're free to teach, you know, what you believe, and I think that's usually the best option for most parents. But a lot of Christian schools, smaller Christian schools, typically use my textbooks. So I know there are some out there that do. I mean, the public system, no. I mean, because, you know, I've got story after story about, not elementary, but I've got story after story about high school teachers who are either fired or demoted, because all they do is question certain evidence for evolution. And that's enough to get them fired or demoted. They don't mention Christianity, they don't mention creation. They just say, well, this is supposed, like they show the soft tissue. How can this be millions of year old soft tissue? You're fired. And that happens a lot, you know, or reassigned. Depending on how strong the union is in that area. Yeah, so no, not in the public sector. That's unfortunate. And it's a crazy thing, because the main reason I was an atheist growing up was because I went to school. I went to school where they gave you a test in second grade, and it told you what you were going to do when you're 50 years old, right? So my test said I was going to do science, so I was tracked in the science field. I got to learn about all these great scientists who were really, really smart. The vast majority of them were Christians, but I couldn't learn about that. The few that were atheists, I got to learn all about that. So my takeaway was smart people are atheists. And of course, I was a smart person, so I was an atheist. That's really why I was an atheist, because I was taught smart people are atheists, and I wanted to be smart. So yeah, and like, you know, there's all this other stuff like Dr. Boyd was talking about these days about believing what you're not. But I mean, even if you go to a school that doesn't allow for that kind of nonsense, there's still this kind of nonsense there. Because whenever you do separation of church and state, the problem is as soon as you pull church out, something goes to fill that void. You know, because we all yearn for it. As C.S. Lewis says, we all have a God-shaped hole in our hearts, right? And so if you take God out, something else is going to try and fill that shape.
Remember
thinking,
profess themselves to be wise, they have become fools. Worship the creator, creature, I'm sorry, more than creator. And for this cause, God turned them over to a reprobate mind. That's where most of our society is, reprobate mind.
and we've definitely got a reprobate mind these days.
You think you're a chicken, cluck, 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 and you're a human being. Well, that's another. You know Phil Springer?
Yes, I do.
You will see that's another sermon for another time. Next question.
Oh, sure.
Give us your name, sir.
Ben,
Hi, man.
Question.
so what would be the explanation of the different types of skulls found in humans? So like
Sure.
Neanderthals and
Right.
the periodics of over time, would that be more of like an adaptation?
Yeah, it is. And for example, Neanderthals, we now know that based on DNA analysis that Neanderthals and humans interbred. So they were humans, because you can't have a human interbreed with something else and produce, living breeding offspring. So we know Neanderthals were fully human. However, they were adapted to a different climate, and they mostly lived in caves, which reduced their amount of sunlight, which caused vitamin D issues, which caused different bone formations and such. But if you look at the skulls that you find, and you actually don't look at the drawings of the organisms, but actually look at the skulls, what you'll find is a bunch of monkey-like skulls and a bunch of human-like skulls. And the few that try and get in between are mostly incredibly fragmented. Right? There's this one group of supposed ancestors of humans called Homo habilis. Homo habilis has no complete anything. But if we find a jawbone that kind of looks part like an Australopithecine and part like a Homo erectus, we'll put it in Homo habilis because it kind of looks in between. But when I don't even have a full single structure, like a full skull or a full forearm or something like that, then I'm not going to believe that actually represents one type of organism. So that's what you see. You see monkey-like stuff, you see human-like stuff. There was I don't know if you don't follow the science literature, you don't see a lot of this, but every now and again there'll be a brand new human evolutionary fossil that's found. Here, meet our ancestor. Well, not all that long ago, there was a guy fossil called Ramapithecus. We now know he's not our but he was considered for a while to be one of our ancestors. And it was a fossil that had been completely flattened. It wasn't three-dimensional at all. It was completely flattened and crushed. And they tried to reconstruct it with a computer program to make a three-dimensional. Well, the computer program is going to do what the people tell it to do, right? So if I want to make a human ancestor, it'll make a human ancestor. And so one of the, when that was published, one of the paleontologists who was skeptical of this said, we go to Africa all the time and we find all these fossils. Africa is full of apes. We never find fossil apes. We always find fossil subhumans. Why is that? It's really odd, isn't it? And what he was saying is these guys are all apes. We're just turning them into human ancestors because it's what we want. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, when I was even in high school, and I was asked to write a paper about human evolution, that was one thing even I noticed back in high school, was that, you see the drawings. If you go actually look for the fossils that these drawings are based on, they're just fragments. They're really hard I can draw a dragon around some of those fossils. But that's what passes, because we need something. Yeah.
All right, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah, it is.
We'll take because of time, we want you to make this excuse well. Pastor Dr. Boyd kept us too late. Despite the cookies and the grapes and everything, he kept us too late. We want to take one more question for tonight, if we have one. So we'll have, won't have Q&A.
Maybe during Sunday school.
We'll see where our time is.
Yeah.
But definitely
In the evening service.
tomorrow evening, we will definitely have Q&A. Any questions you didn't ask tonight, or you can ask tomorrow night, and we'll give you an answer. And if we don't have an answer, we know how to tell you we don't know.
Yeah.
But we'll find out and let you know.
You know.
Okay? So we have one more question for the night, and if not, we're gonna dismiss you. Now, Pastor, come and do what he's gonna do, and then dismiss you to our table. I didn't say anything. We're gonna get some, Pastor, you come and carry on. Make sure you got your. Make sure you got the understanding of time as well. That's a preview on the next year. Make sure you got one and you did see us everything. God bless you. Thank you for listening tonight. Let's give Dr. Brewer.
You need to sum up, though.
Exactly, yeah.